After some of the news this week, like migration reforms, by-election developments, European integration, and polling data, there are so many questions left unanswered. Questions like, will the policy go through? Are we likely to see a customs union, or are we more likely to see a closer relationship with Europe? And what does the polling data actually goddamn mean? And that is without talking about the government and asking, is Starmer stronger this week as a result of the resignations and the leaked messages and the piling pressure, which has to be the biggest topic this week. This episode of the Roundup by NewsOfTheWeek will answer those questions, giving you the facts and the context from the week's news so you can make your own decisions. Of course, this will be paired with the same balanced and in-depth analysis I try to bring to the news every single week. That means that if you struggle to follow the news this week through frustration or packed schedule, or maybe you just don't know where to start, the Roundup is the place to be. As always, you can check the text version of this episode for more detail on all of the stories, my personal ramblings on the stories, and all of my sources. You can find that on newsoftheweek.net. First off, the I reported on the Home Office planning to restrict migrant settlement routes. It's a move that could risk a Labour rebellion, and we're going to look at whether the policy can survive that rebellion. To answer that question, we need to know why it's in the news, and it's in the news because it's a consultation that's just finished this week. It closed on the 12th of February, and a consultation is basically the government getting their advice and reaction on a policy from people that it will affect and the people that may or may not be implementing it. And the government has proposed restrictions on migration. One of those restrictions was increasing the qualifying period for settlement from 5 to 10 years. That means someone would have to live in the UK for 5 to 10 years before they are considered settled and they can get access to more stuff and better integrate into society. Another change centred around that qualifying period again. It was for skilled workers this time, i.e. people that have a job that's equivalent to a bachelor's degree, and that qualifying period would go up to 15 years. The third main change was implementing a no recourse on public funds condition, which to everyone that isn't a policy planner means that people in these qualifying periods couldn't access benefits like a British citizen. But there's effectively a bonus change too, and it's called the Earned Settlement Scheme, which basically means someone's time to settle would depend on them and their personal circumstances. It would vary on aspects of someone's life, like their character and their conduct, basically criminal convictions, and integration. We're talking things like language thresholds and culture tests, contribution in terms of economic contribution to the taxpayer. Are they paying more in tax than they're taking out? And that could accelerate citizenship. And finally, residence, as in how long they have been living in the UK before they are settled. Residence alone, it says, will not grant settlement. The controversy comes not because of the detail, although some people will be upset with the detail. The risk of rebellion is because these changes would be applied retroactively to people already on the path to settling in the UK, i.e. the sort of people that are probably already around you that are living in the UK but are not yet settled and are not yet a British citizen. The backlash has come from 100 union leaders, peers and MPs, who are roughly 30 MPs, writing to the Home Secretary demanding she pauses the reforms. They've called them un-British and said she's moving the goalposts in reference to extending these qualifying periods for the people that are already on the path to a reduced qualifying period. It could get amended now the consultation is over, but with 30 MPs, the maths just isn't there to force major changes unless we see more MPs get more upset. While we're on the topic of migration, though, the Standard reported that the UK is set to allocate £1.4 billion to transport and escort services for migrants, but we ask the question, is this just a scandalous waste? Now, the Standard have access to a document, which I don't have access to, but the document reportedly highlights a potential contract which could cover operation of short-term holding facilities, welfare and child protection, medical support for those in those facilities, the use of force to, ensure compliance, staffing and training of the people that would run those facilities, and then risk assessments, I guess, in setting up facilities and deporting fouled migrants. In short, it seems like the government is looking at contracting services to assist in deporting failed asylum seekers. And that sits aside from their policies to remove incentives and increase returns, also ending hotel use. So, is the £1.4 billion an excessive price tag for this? To answer that question, the context matters because the IFS data, which is data from an economic think tank, shows that asylum, border, visa and passport spending averaged $2.6 billion per year between 2021 and 2025. That category includes deportations, which is kind of what we're talking about here, border force, accommodation and processing, everything in between. If 1.4 billion then runs across 10 years, which it would be typical for that to do for this type of contract, it'd be around 140 million per year being spent on deportations alone. And we can't be sure how much of the 2.6 figure the IFS has is actually being spent on just returns, but knowing increased costs have been pushed up by more illegal migration and an increased hotel use, we can say it's probably not anywhere near all of that £2.6 billion. Regardless, the 140 million across 10 years to me does not seem to be disproportionate, especially since other contracts, like the one on hotels, funnily enough, was argued by the government as good because it would be cheaper to renew the contracts than use services later on. I don't think they're going to be paying over and above the money for something like this when they wouldn't for the hotels. Keep in mind though, whether this is good value overall depends entirely on the contract detail, which obviously we do not yet know. So it's not clearly a waste, but it isn't clearly efficient either. Let's move away from migration though, because there is more to talk about, funnily enough. BBC News reported that the representation of the People's Bill is progressing through Parliament. And let's talk about timescale, because this was slated to come before 2029, not 2027. This bill will allow 16 and 17-year-olds to vote. It will restrict political donation and expand voting locations, potentially including supermarkets and train stations. It's currently at its second reading in the Commons, which means it's barely just started in terms of a policy seeing its way through. It will then face a third reading where changes and amendments will be debated in the Commons. Then it will go over to the House of Lords where the whole process will be read out again, and we'll see more scrutiny from more experts, more people involved. And that process, as you can tell by the way I'm explaining it, usually takes months. It doesn't always, but the average policy does. As we know, the government says it intends for this to be law by 2029. So what's up? What's with the rush? Legislating now means that 16-year-olds could vote earlier if a general election was called before 2029, which is likely the rationale behind starting now. In terms of who wants it and how likely it is to get through, though, the Conservatives are opposed to lowering the voting age. The Liberal Democrats and the Greens seem to support it. Reform's position appears mixed, and Labour and the government are obviously behind it. What's more significant, though, is that they do have the numbers, especially if the vote is whipped, and I'm not sure whether it will be yet. At this stage, all I can say is it does look like it's passed, and in terms of the timescale, it's probably just in case there's going to be an early election. Looking at foreign policy, though, we have a little bit more migration news. ITV News reported that the Democratic Republic of Congo has agreed to take back illegal migrants after diplomatic pressure from the UK. The question we're going to answer is this significant? In December, the government threatened visa restrictions and the removal of preferential diplomatic treatment for DRC. Following similar agreements from other African nations, the DRC has now agreed as well. The Home Office says these deals could see around 3,000 removals, but again, we need to talk about the context because since 2024, roughly 65,000 people have entered the UK illegally. Now, hopefully, the majority of those people will have good claims and will not need to be returned, making deals to return 3,000 people more significant. But that probably isn't likely. And when we're only talking about a small proportion of people coming from the DRC and the other African nations we're talking about, 3,000 doesn't actually seem like a lot. So is it significant? Probably not because of those things, but it does show deals are being agreed. And when it's combined with things like the one in, one out deal, which we're supposedly going to see scaled up, as well as other changes, including speeding up returns and the other ones we just talked about with restrictions, it could start to build more of a picture of more effective and more efficient reforms in dealing with illegal migration. But it isn't there yet at the moment. We're certainly talking about an incremental, possibly insignificant reform. And you'll be pleased to know that is the end of the migration news this episode. We'll be moving on now to other things. The Eye detailed the Chancellor has said the UK would sign up to the rules of an EU single market, but without an actual deal. And that headline is probably making you think, like, what? How? So we're going to look into it. At a speech this week, Rachel Reeves, the Chancellor, said Britain's future is inextricably bound with Europe's and described the EU as the biggest prize in terms of trade. She acknowledged the closer alignment would require closer regulation, and that's something we know is being negotiated on because it's appeared in previous weeks of this show. There's certain sectors and certain industries that are going to align themselves, or supposedly going to align themselves with the EU in order to get a better chance of trading with them. It's also something that's been reaffirmed by the Prime Minister this week. Regardless, there's a miss between what the politicians are saying and what the negotiations are resulting in. That headline made it sound like we were going to rejoin the customs union in all but name, but actually what's going on is that we're probably going to see certain industries align themselves closer with the EU, while overall it's still separate. Now, quickly on Mandelson, because we're still talking about that fallout from the revelations from the Epstein files a few weeks ago. The big news is that he's been called to testify in the USA over that issue, which was reported by the Telegraph. Now, they reportedly believe that there are rumours of pieces of evidence which have come to light due to the files. Specifically, the US's belief is that Mandelson holds critical information on Epstein's enablers and his co-conspirators. The rationale behind telling them to come over is that they could find more out. Mandelson has until the 27th of this month, 27th of February, to respond, but there is literally no ability for the USA to force him to attend. We saw that Andrew Mountbatten Windsor, formerly Prince Andrew, did not respond to his request to go over and give evidence. So we're not sure what Mandelson's going to do, but it is an important development in that situation, hence its inclusion in this week's episode. In terms of general politics, though, we've still got the biggest deal of this week to come, and that is asking the question, is Starmer stronger this week than last week? Now, 3 aides have resigned, a minister has released his private messages with Mandelson, and a regional leader has called on Starmer to resign as well. Now, first, the messages. Wes Streeting has released WhatsApp messages to show transparency over his contact with Peter Mandelson to try and clear himself, is what he's saying. I've looked at the messages. They were informal, maybe a little friendly in places, with well wishes and praise for certain things. There was criticism of the government on things like Israel and growth, and there was also the pitching of speaking events too. But other than that, it's not like the messages did not show them to be really, really close friends, as some people were reporting. Now, the release of the messages themselves is unprecedented. It's not something that we usually see done by a government minister. The thing is, it may have absolved Streeting a little, but it raised questions again about him positioning himself for a leadership challenge to Keir Starmer. Now, Streeting denied that, and it seems that he is still confident in Starmer, at least publicly. So this hasn't hurt Starmer yet, but it very much could. And if this is more than Streeting trying to distance himself from Mandelson, it pretty much will. Secondly, on the resignations, Morgan McSweeney, we're going to talk about him first, as he was the first one. We've got to talk about the resignations because they help us understand whether Starmer has got stronger or weaker. Now, McSweeney was one of the key advisors to Starmer as his chief of staff. He was a long-time friend, apparently, and strategically important advisor for Keir Starmer. He was the person that pushed Mandelson's appointment, yeah, but he was also the one that guided Starmer into Downing Street and into the Labour leadership in the first place. In resigning, he took responsibility for the appointment and the advice he gave Keir Starmer. Arguably, that creates distance between the PM and the issue. It also gives the cabinet the ability to say, well, someone's taken accountability for it, and politically move on. Also, the message in the resignation was complimentary as well. It wasn't an attack on the government, so it's not going to damage them in that sense. The flip side of that is that by taking the accountability and resigning and taking what he called the only honourable course of action, it has removed a central political operator who has shaped Starmer's leadership from the beginning. That creates a massive chaotic mess for Starmer's operation in number 10, because as much as it allows for a fresh start, we're not sure what that fresh start will look like. We're not sure whether that will be better, less politically controversial operation than the one we've just seen. Because of that, it's really hard to say whether that's actually strengthened Starmer or weakened him, because on the face of it, it has strengthened him, but then also that is a massive hole that's left in his team that we can't really get too far away from. So we're not sure of the short-term impact that will have. Similarly, with Tim Allen resigning as Director of Communications, the possibility of a reset is increased. It again gives the government distance. It allows them to build a new team and actually meaningfully do that. Also, the letter of resignation from Mr. Allen was not negative to Starmer either. But then at the same time, there's even more of that instability concern because all of a sudden the hole gets deeper, and that's another part of the team gone. With the resignation as well, there's the issue of job term, because Tim Allen was only in the role for 5 months. Slightly later on in the week, though, Sir Chris Warmard stood down as the UK's top civil servant. He resigned after just 14 months and left by a mutual agreement. It was not a resignation, and that means it's slightly different. It still affects Starmer because the role of the Cabinet Secretary is what this guy did, and that means he has to be a bridge between the Prime Minister and the Cabinet. Again, that creates more instability, but it doesn't seem to have the massive upside that could come from the McSweeney resignation. To answer the question, is Starmer stronger? In theory, the answer is yes, because it allows him to build a fresh team. And as the weeks went on, we haven't seen any massive ministerial upheaval or anything that there was worry about at the start of the week. So yes, it seems to make Starmer stronger. But there could almost be a hidden downside which could weaken Starmer in the next few months. And that would weaken the government that's already on the ropes. That bit comes from the instability and the possibility for new leadership challenges in that weakened state. Overall, it could definitely make him stronger, but we do not know the short-term impact yet, and that is very important to note. Great. We're clear on Starmer. Let's now get clear with parliamentary by-elections. How fun is that? Of course, we're talking about the Gorton and Denton by-election, which is a seat we were talking about a few weeks ago when Andy Burnham, the Manchester mayor, was trying to push his way into Parliament, apparently for that leadership battle with Starmer. Now, polling shows Reform are on 30%, Labour are on 27%, and the Greens are on 17%. Professor Rob Ford said all three outcomes are possible, and he said that the Reform could win if the left splits the vote, and also Labour could recover, having had the history of winning in the area and also winning 50% in 2024. Then there's the Greens, who could benefit from their increased national profile and could split the left vote, maybe getting in themselves. There's all sorts of stakes here. Reform needs it to continue their momentum, Labour needs it not to be humiliated, and the Greens have a chance to justify their attention. As for what's the most likely result, the professor couldn't tell you, the polling didn't say, and I can't say either. It seems like we're really talking about Reform or Labour, just off the polling and the significance in the area. So working on that rationale, it's hard to get away from those two parties, although it could be just as easy to say that Labour will be hurt by the last few weeks and then they won't get in. We're through the bulk of the show now, but don't worry, because we still have stats and trends to talk about, and that's where Joe Politics reported that Keir Starmer's favourability has improved by 10 points since January. He sits at 22% favourability and is 69% unfavourable. That means he is mostly unfavourable, but he's had a little bit more of a favourability gain. He's a little bit more popular than he was before. He's still negative, but he is also closely followed by others. So what does this actually tell us? It suggests the media pressure over the Mandelson situation did not significantly damage public perception. It does not mean Starmer is popular, like I said. It just does suggest that the crisis didn't actually weaken him in the eyes of the public. But we'll zoom out now, because that's the episode done. The government is tightening settlement rules, increasing deportations, getting closer to Europe, restructuring Downing Street, and maybe not being better for that, all while we have a by-election and a slight poll bump for the government. And that is all of the news this week. Thank you for listening to the Roundup by News of the Week, and remember, you can check all my details on newsoftheweek.net, my website. I promise next week's Roundup will be just as thorough and just as good, so remember to like and subscribe, share this with a friend, and comment what you thought, because that will help me greatly to show this show to more people. I'll be back next week, but for now, bye.